This is Daniel Fagel, and you're tuned in to The Trajectory. Before the iPhone was the Palm Pilot, and that device was brought to you by Jeff Hawkins. Our guest this week is Jeff Hawkins, who has written a number of books about intelligence and has essentially been working on replicating the brain since the early 2000s when he got out of his other tech venture. Jeff runs Numenta now, which is a company that one of our previous guests, Dilip George, used to work at back in the day. Dilip's early days working on artificial general intelligence. Jeff has talked a lot about his theory of intelligence. He has a book called 1,000 Minds, which is worth a read. But we're not here to just unpack that theory. We're here to talk about something Jeff often doesn't get to talk about, which is this notion of intelligence blooming beyond humanity. Jeff isn't interviewed frequently about this. I would suspect this is about as deep as Jeff has ever gone in an interview about how intelligence might blossom beyond humanity and what kind of intelligence should. Jeff is pretty adamant that in a long enough time horizon that will be the case, but what could be good or bad about that, and what's the purpose of it all? Jeff has an interesting theory about where knowledge fits into that question, but I'll tackle that in the outro. You'll pick it up from Jeff himself. For those of you tuned in on YouTube, unfortunately, there was no video that came through on Jeff's side for this interview, a little bit of a flub up of a technical matter there. But I hope Jeff's personality comes through loud and clear through his voice and, more importantly, his ideas. So without further ado, we'll fly right into the meat and potatoes. This is Jeff Hawkins here in The Trajectory. So, Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah, glad to be able to dive in. I've followed your work for a long enough stint of time. You used to live pretty close to where your guys' little laboratory is there. And many people have sort of caught wind of your book. Before we get into this Worthy Successor theme that I know you've already seen Bostrom and a little bit of Bengio stuff, I want to touch on your grounding around intelligence itself. We're going to be talking today about the trajectory of intelligence, where we think it's headed, maybe where it should head. You began somewhere different than a lot of computer scientists of sort of the origin of intelligence itself within living creatures, like ourselves. How did that study of where it started influence your ideas of where it is going or should go?
Yeah, sure. I started my career in computer science, and but I fell in love with brains really early on when I was in my 20s. And I decided that understanding how the brain worked was the most fascinating thing that anyone could do in my lifetime. It was like the great unsolved question.
Absolutely.
And I also realized that once you understand how the brain works, you'd have a deep understanding of what intelligence is. Exactly, because we want to understand the brain in sufficient detail that we could build machines that work on those principles. So that's where I came into it. I didn't come in from an AI perspective. I came in from a neuroscience and brain perspective. But I always knew that once we made progress in understanding the brain, we would have a better insight on what intelligence actually is. And we would have then a really clear idea of what it is to how you go about creating something that's intelligent. And with that background knowledge, which most AI people don't have, it leads you to different conclusions about what's possible in the future, what's likely in the future, how we might get there. So I have a very different perspective coming from the neuroscience background.
Yeah, I mean, and that's clear in listening to some of your interviews here. When you think about where intelligence sort of is going, there's a lot of perspectives in this domain, and I think for many folks, it's a little bit up in the air. Bengio certainly doesn't have a crystal ball, and I don't think anybody necessarily does. But when we think about what intelligence is bubbling up into, if that is happening, what further development would look like, where things are headed. Did the grounding in its beginnings influence for you what maybe the next kind of posthuman steps might look like? And if so, how?
Well, absolutely. It leads me to very different opinions than most AI scientists. For example, I don't think today's transformer networks are truly intelligent, and I don't think they're on the path to AGI. There's a lot of people who believe that. I fundamentally think it's not true. And I say that because I know how brains go about being intelligent. It's really, really different. And it's not just different, it's a difference that makes the difference. And so from that perspective, I could say, yeah, I'm not worried about today's, chatbots or transformer networks, becoming sentient beings or taking over the world or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I can see how we can build machines that truly are intelligent. They work on different principles of the brain. And with that perspective, I could say, well, what's possible? What could we do? What would a super intelligent machine actually look like? and what would its capabilities be, and what are the risks and rewards of doing so. And I just reach different conclusions than most people, having that sort of deep neuroscience background. So it's not that I'm not worried about the future of today's AI, or I think it's useless or anything like that. It's really important work. But I don't actually think it's the trajectory to, when we talk about AGI or truly intelligent machines, I don't think we're on that trajectory with that technology we have today.
Yeah, well, and you're not alone there. I mean, in all fairness, right, LeCun is kind of famously in that camp, and there's a whole bundle of folks, some of whom are a little bit more disparaging than you are of LLMs, like really laughing it off as like a total joke or a bad invention. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration personally. I think we should give credit where it's due, and this tech is impressive. But again, to your point, doesn't look like intelligence in terms of the way that you define it. In all fairness, and I'm not making an argument on either side, by the way, I'm just juggling the idea. In all fairness, is it possible that thought in machines or intelligence, we could even use terms like agency, would manifest, in practice in a way that would be intelligent, but through means and mechanisms that aren't like ours? I think about submarines not really swimming and airplanes not flapping their wings and whatever. You've heard all those analogies. I'm not saying that the brain approach is the wrong approach by any means. I'm just saying, is it hypothetically possible intelligence and agency might manifest very differently outside of human skulls?
It's possible, but I don't think I don't think we're going to end up there.
Okay.
I think if you really want to create intelligent machines, and that we would all agree with intelligence, we're going to end up in a point which is much more brain-like. Your question is, I don't think that today's technology could actually do that, get there.
Yeah.
I really don't. But I know how to get there through brain-like mechanisms. And I can we can talk about those differences without getting too technical about them. There's some pretty simple ways of explaining the difference. And so it's possible. A scientist will never say nothing is impossible.
Yeah, I think that's a good position to have. I think, yes.
Yeah.
But for you, it's very. So you, it's like, we're going to coalesce. There's almost a singularity of how to get smart. And for you, it's like, it's got to go through a filter where it looks, feels, smells, operates just like what's upstairs.
Well, it has to operate on the same principles. And we can talk about what those principles are.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be a brain. We don't have to emulate a brain, but we have to emulate what a brain does. And what brains do is not what today's neural networks do.
Yeah.
So
we can touch briefly. I know some people have seen your book, and there's tons of talks where you're kind of summarizing the core concepts. If you want to give us one or two, that's perfectly fine. I do want to get into the Worthy Successor stuff, but maybe you got one or two core distinctions we can just lay out briefly.
We could just lay out one big distinction.
Wonderful.
Brains learn through movement. We are sensory motor systems. We learn by moving our limbs and our bodies and our eyes. We do this constantly, and the brain can't understand these changing inputs, which are rapidly changing all the time, unless it knows how the body is moving. So we are able to explore the world. We're able to pick things up and manipulate them. We have choices about what we learn, and because we can explore and build tools, we can learn new things. That today's neural networks, they don't basically learn new things. They're basically taking human knowledge as it's encapsulated in various ways and making a good model of it. So we're sensory motor systems. In fact, if you look at the brain, the neocortex, this is the deepest I'll get. Okay, so it's a big organ up on top.
Yeah.
We have a neocortex. Every part of the neocortex has a motor output. There's nothing in our intelligence, and nothing about intelligence isn't motor related, meaning movement related. So we are inherently movement related systems, and that makes a huge difference. It makes a difference how the models are built in our head, that we are naturally robotic systems. If I want to make an AI system that explores the universe and manipulates tools, we do that naturally. Brains do that naturally. Today's AI systems don't do that naturally at all. And it's a hard fit for them. So this idea that it's all about sensory motor learning and sensory motor modeling, that's a huge distinction between almost every AI system today.
I think, well, I would concur monumentally. I don't have a really hard stance. I actually think, Jeff, it's a screaming shame how little we know about consciousness. Like, wow, to think 12 years ago, 15 years ago, first getting into this space and being like, well, man, we're going to, AI is going to get smarter. We're going to know more about this secret light going on inside of skulls. Like, the latter really just didn't happen, unfortunately. Right. I don't have a lot of takes there. Hinton's made some interesting allusions to LLMs being capable of potentially
feeling or whatnot. I'll leave that to the side. I tend to be very much in your camp that intelligence in a genuinely agentic, generally capable way would have to have embodiment in maybe in many dimensions. I mean, the way some people imagine AGI potentially emerging, Jeff, and I'd love your take on this, is, you take these gigantic systems that are just vacuuming up Wikipedia and YouTube, and then you give them a million biped robot instantiations where they're fixing cars and cleaning floors and, working on roofs and whatever. And then you give them a bunch of industrial implications where they're putting together machines and electronics. And then maybe you make tiny little beetle-shaped ones that go into burning buildings and try to see if there's any children in there, right? All these different wacky physical instantiations, maybe even, Jeff, with senses that we don't have. You and I mean,
right.
We got 5.5 or whatever. I mean, you might build a robot that's got 12.5,
right.
maybe 50.
That's one of the things we talk about the future of intelligence, even though I believe it's going to be based on the principles of the brain work. They may mean nothing at all like humans. They have to have sensors, but not human sensors. They have to be able to move those sensors relative to something, to the world, or to cyberspace, something. And this got to be a concept of I'm sensing different parts of the world. But the sensors and the embodiment don't have to be at all like humans. And they could be, I think, and I'm not going to pretend I know what that future is. I've written about this, but essentially we're bad at imagining things like that. And I'm bad at it too. So we imagine the future is going to be like, just like it is now, but better. Like, it's going to be like human-like, but reality, AI is not going to be like that at all. AI is going to be some embodiments that are going to be so different than we can imagine today. It doesn't mean it's bad. Like these things are not out of control. These are things we're going to create. It's not like, these things are going to happen on their own. But that's the history of technology and history of that we're really bad at imagining future uses. Like you could ask Alan Turing and John von Neumann, who invented the computer in some sense, they wouldn't have thought about the internet or satellites or GPS or email or anything like that. None of that stuff would make any sense to them. But all they could imagine was calculating numbers. I mean, literally, that's what they did, right? So we're in that mode right now. We're saying, these AI systems are going to be like humans. I don't think so.
I'm glad you bring that up. I mean, I always chafe at this notion of sort of like, well, it's trained on our data, so it will have our emotions and our senses, and it'll talk like us and walk like us. I mean, it feels, Bostrom does a great job of painting kind of the possible state spaces of being, right? And the human circle is like this big, and you got some animals over here, but then you just have a canvas that just goes on maybe infinitely, we don't really know, of conceivable ways to drink in senses and to act physically in the world and to inhabit it. And there are questions about where is the human place in a world populated with such entities, but let's save that for a little bit later in our chat.
That's part of this podcast.
We'll get into it. Exactly. We're going to dive in. So we'll talk next about kind of the core brunt of what the theme in the series has been about, which I think Bostrom did a great job of opening up around this notion of the worthy successor. And the idea here, Jeff, is that I've heard some of your talks where you've been pretty overt about, hey, you've got a vision of life that is a continuum and is quite long term, and that what populates the galaxy or terraforms Mars might not be us, it might be machines, and maybe there's certain things that only machines would do long after we're gone. Hypothetically, you've spoken overtly about this. When you think about what traits an AI would have to have so that if it went off and populated the galaxy and at some point humanity attenuated, if you could look down from the stars, although, presumably you won't be, but let's say you would look down and say, you know what, that worked out okay. I actually feel pretty damn good about that. What are those traits of a worthy successor for you and why?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, I want to be careful about the word successor. That sort of implies that we're replacing ourselves, perhaps.
I get it. No, you're right. I think it does have connotations.
I don't want to use that word, right? I mean, there's humanity. I'm a human, you're a human, we have human needs.
Yep.
There's a view of the world from a human perspective. I also spend a lot of time thinking about a view of the world from a non-human perspective. Imagine I was some sort of just an observer of the universe and not a human, and maybe of some super intelligent system someplace, but just looking at objectively what the universe is going on. And that's what science does, right? We kind of take, a lot of science is just trying to understand what are the fundamental things that are actually happening here.
Yeah.
And of course, the history of science sort of takes humans further and further from the center of the universe, right? We now understand that we're just a teeny little part of the universe.
Yeah.
So I like to think broadly. Like, I can talk about what's the future of humanity. We can talk about that. What would be good for humanity?
Okay.
But I also think we don't spend enough time thinking about what role could we play in a universe where maybe humans aren't around anymore. And I have a chapter I wrote called estate planning for humanity. It's not like I'm planning for humans to disappear.
Yep.
But what happens? It's likely actually at some point. We don't know how long it would be, but that's the history of nature. Is that we're not even a constant species. We're changing constantly. So
okay, go ahead. If you want to dive in.
Well, I'll get to your point now. Like, what would these things? So I've asked myself, what's the point of it all, right?
Absolutely, good question. I think that's the best question, Jeff. I love it.
Okay, so the only thing, our existence is important to us, and I'm a father and I'm a grandfather, and I'm important. These things are important to me, but the universe doesn't really care about us. And so what would other intelligent species care about? What would other entities care about, to know about? What can we do to help the future broader than our own future? It's not the only thing to do, but it's one thing I don't think people spend enough time thinking about. And so I asked myself, well, is there a trajectory to the universe? Well, at the moment, we don't know about that. We don't really see there's a purpose to anything. We haven't figured that out yet. One thing that seems constant to me is we as humans, and I think every intelligent species that would ever exist in any part of the universe, would want to gain knowledge. We all want to understand how the universe works, what's its past, what's its future. And the knowledge that any other being would create was the same as our knowledge. Knowledge about the science and the universe as a whole seems to be universal. That is, there isn't a different reality someplace else in space. And so, much of what drives the intellectual abilities of humans is to understand our universe, understand who we are, how we got here. And that information continues beyond our lives are over. My particular life, a million years from now, no one's going to know about it. Won't make any difference. But perhaps we can gain knowledge, and that knowledge will continue on. And so I think that, to me, the only worthy goal that we can have, broader than our own existence, is to accumulate knowledge and make sure it's not lost. That is, it is preserved for some potentially future intelligent species on this planet, or for some future intelligent species that come visit, or someplace we go. The point is, that's the only thing I can think of that is a worthy goal. And I can't prove that it's worthy. It's not worthy to whom? It's worthy to any other sentient being, right? That's the best I can come up with. It motivates me.
Yeah. So, we're definitely going to unpack that. I want to, if you don't mind, I'll just do it in a couple layers. So one idea that dawns on me, and I think when I first heard you articulate it, I think I would completely concur, and I have been ardently focused for 12 years on the whole what's the point question. I think it is very easy to say, well, put your kids through college and, get a vacation house, and you can say that. But I think that from my standpoint, again, the reason the term is worthy successor, and you don't have to use that phraseology if you don't like, but you even wrote the chapter on estate planning, is that, Lucretius was right. There's matter and there's void, and things are coming in and out of existence. And there isn't, so if we look at the options that we have, I don't think it's realistic for us to say that there is one option called eternal hominid kingdom, where for the next 200 billion years, it is hominids as they are, trimming our fingernails, getting jealous, eating vegetables because we have to. That's not actually one of the options that we have. So it's okay for a minute, but there is going to be either a bubbling out of us biologically and brain-computer interface wise. There will be a bubbling beyond us in the digital side. And I don't mean this to say, I think some people have very frankly said, and Bostrom as well, that a worthy successor should treat the other intelligence as well, for example. So it's not like a worthy successor implies, the dark destruction of all other life. But I think you're bringing up a point that I think more people should look at, frankly, maybe as frankly as you do, which is that long term, this is turning into something. And there will be a day when we'll attenuate, and we should think about how that baton gets passed off. If I'm I'm picking up what you're putting down.
That's right. And here's another way to think about it. As a biological species, we're not particularly impressive. We're not particularly strong. We don't fly. We're not very good swimmers. We're not really particularly fast. The only thing that makes us unique is our intelligence. That's it.
Yeah.
And so we have, it's really a completely different type of thing, because no other animal that on our planet has knowledge about the universe. No other planet knows that, the Earth is round in a certain size, or how old things are. We're the only bit that's unique. That is our thing. And so that's the thing, that if we want to preserve something, if we want to progress something, we might as well progress the thing we're good at, and survival and having sex and having kids. Well, yeah, that's good. We should do that, but that's not really unique to us,
Yeah.
So it's kind of like short-sighted, I think, that's all you want to focus on. I mean, let's pick a worthy goal, right? Something we should attain that's just beyond life, beyond at least biological life on this planet.
Absolutely.
That's what I think about it.
I think it's incredibly important. I mean, just to pick up what you're putting down, I mean, towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about innovation, regulation, decision-making, what could or should humans do to move closer to such a worthy successor or such a, let's call it a blooming or positive post-human future. For you, the nutshell here is, hey, knowledge is sort of what makes us special or unique. It allows us to function. It allows us to even contemplate future intelligent life or past intelligent life. Let's ensure a rolling snowball of the acquisition and maybe distillation of such knowledge about the universe and other things that can continue to expand and do other worthy stuff. And then maybe if we meet other species in some wild, wacky future, we'll have something useful for them and there will be a way to contribute. But to your point, you brought up a great point, which is that right now, you just look out into the game, right? The game being nature, right? And it doesn't seem like there's a goal, right? There's no goalpost for nature. I mean, nature wants us to have children, and nature has some immediate goals, but there's no grand objective. We've got to pick it. My supposition is that if there was a grander and higher objective, in other words, if there was a more coherent, that would be the great thing to do, aim within the universe, which, by the way, I'm not at all convinced there is one. But if there is, I functionally guarantee it would require vastly post-human intelligence to access such a goal. And that maybe,
probably.
Yeah. And
probably, right.
There are some people who are of the belief, and I'd love your thoughts on this. David Deutsch is a famous example. I've never met the man in person. I have plenty of respect for him. But Jan Tallinn was on not terribly long ago and sort of brought up this idea. I don't think he was espousing it, but he brought it up. This idea of humans being Turing complete. That is to say, anything that in principle could be conceived of by a grand, vastly post-human superintelligence could, in theory, also be fully understood by humanity, and that it's possible that we've crossed a threshold where the totality of at least conceptual knowledge is fully graspable within the hominid skull. What say you of that?
I don't know. I don't want to take a strong position on that.
Interesting.
Clearly, we can understand things that we can't directly sense, right? I mean, I have understanding of atoms and quarks and DNA, and I can't sense these things. I have no ability, but we've built tools that allow us to visualize those things.
Yes.
I can't sense directly the size of the universe or the age of the universe.
Yeah.
But I know those things. So there's clearly stuff we can learn that is not in our genetic past, that wasn't conceived of. But on the other hand, our brains have limits, right? We are limited in the speed at which our neurons process. We're limited in the amount of memory we have. We can't really change that. We're limited in our senses, but I just give you an example where our senses aren't as limited as you think they are, because I can take things like atoms and turn them into images, and I can try to imagine them. So I don't know what the limits of our ability are, but I would say we have limits to our speed and limits to our capacity. I will also say that humans are burdened with our emotional components of our lives. I can say it's a burden, or I can say it's a blessing, depending on how you look at it. I mean, I love loving people and I love nature and all these things. But on the other hand, we're burdened by our competitive natures and our totalitarian inclination, all this kind of other crap that we do.
Yeah.
So that may get in the way of our sort of being Turing complete. Turing complete assumes that there's an infinite amount of memory in some sense, of like a Turing machine, right? So I don't know. I don't think that's an important question at the moment. Clearly, we can understand more than we know right now. There's no question about it, right? We're learning new things all the time that seem pretty difficult to learn, and they weren't in our past, and so we're learning them. What's the limit there? I don't know. We haven't reached that yet, and so I think we should worry about that when we get there. I do think, we are limited. I mean, you mentioned earlier clipping your toenails. It's like, we're blessed that some of us can spend some of our time thinking about these problems.
Absolutely.
Vast majority of humans have no time to do this at all. They're trying to get food on the table. Their life is miserable. I mean, I don't know. I'm not necessarily miserable, but they don't have time or the ability to education and so on to be able to spend time on this. So, I'm open about what's the future of humanity, right? We got difficult problems to deal with. We got all this messy biology we're dealing with, all of our messy emotions and biological drives we have to deal with. So we're kind of a complex, messy system. And the way I view it is we're trying to break out of that, right? Our goal should be to break out of that past, because I don't really care that, how my genes work. It's more like, or what animals eat other animals. I mean, it's important from our personal biology, but it's not important from the big picture, right? The big picture is like all about intelligence and knowledge, and humans will have some capacity beyond what we have now. I don't know how much it is, but we'll have it.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll run into those limits sometime.
Well, my supposition is, again, you're not taking a firm philosophical stance, but if you believed that hypothetically we could grasp it all, presumably you wouldn't be as enthused about the grand project of higher and greater vessels of higher and greater knowledge continuing beyond us.
Well, I think one thing that's for certain is we will not be able to travel beyond Earth very much. It'd be nice, but it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. And so even just going to other places in our solar system is very limited. Just this discovery that happened this week, like, oh, maybe there's rock on Mars that proves there's life. Well, we won't get to see that rock for another 3 years or whatever it is, 6 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's the universe have to offer? We don't know. We can't travel there. We're kind of limited. So I think even if we have the capacity to know things, we won't have the capacity to discover them. And that's part of the process. So it's not just knowing something; it's being able to explore and discover and find new knowledge. And we're limited in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I'll roll over into something that relates directly to what you're talking about here about optimizing for knowledge. You talked about kind of the messiness of our emotions. There's this idea, because I look at my own grand conceptions of the big game, like you do. I mean, I find it hard to live without at least some notion of what a North Star could be, at least striving ardently to find one and then striving ardently to move in its direction. Feels like you're pretty compelled by such a drive. Any of those distillations about that North Star, I'm eager for the day when there's vastly more intelligence to conceive of better North Stars. I think you and I, Jeff, we can conceive of higher, and I might even argue better goals than a Labrador Retriever. My supposition is that there will be entities beyond us that will conceive of better goals. So I'm not
maybe.
I happen to believe it's likely to be the case, but it could be wrong. We'll get into that. Here's the thought
I said
experiment.
earlier.
Oh, go ahead.
I said earlier, the best thing I can think of.
Yeah,
is the pursuit of knowledge. Right?
Sure.
I didn't say that was the only thing. I didn't say it was even the best thing. It was like, in my lifetime, the time of years I've had on this planet, that's the thing I can think of. And maybe there's better ones.
That's all we can do is hand that baton as far as we can go.
Right.
If there be something to us as we are to the Labrador, someone will maybe be grateful for your contribution, probably chuckle a bit at some of it, and then move on. And I would say that would feel like, so long as it's doing interesting and good things and surviving, maybe be a good thing. Here's the thought experiment I'll bounce off of you. When you think about the highest goal that you can conceive of, I almost think of, and I haven't put this in an article, but I need to at some point, this notion that AGI is almost it's almost a Rorschach test for what someone's core sort of drives or propensities are. That is to say the following. If I remember once I had 3 employees, this is 6-7 years ago, sitting around. and talked about sort of like if AI crossed these thresholds of agency and intelligence and capability and whatever. And there was someone who's like it was almost comical how it worked out. There was someone who's very curiosity driven, like totally about like researching and finding things, who was like, well, I think it would want to discover everything about the universe or something like that. And then there was someone else who's like super like empathetic, and they were like, well, it would have to be conscious, and maybe it would like experience all kinds of bliss, like beyond what current life can experience. And maybe it would experience things that are different than pain and pleasure, right? Totally different ranges of sentience. And maybe it could be like loving, and like there was someone else that was more focused on connection. They're like, well, it would really exemplify love, and it would find ways to be caring for other creatures and caring for alien intelligences. And so it's almost like, you take the word AGI, put it in front of somebody, and like they're going to see a butterfly if they want to see butterflies, and they're going to see a snowman if they want to see a snowman.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying anybody's idea is wrong here, but I'm just saying, do you think there's some credence to that idea?
Well, I mean, there's credence to almost every idea.
Okay. All right.
Right.
Sure.
So, but I don't want to cop out on it. To me, it's the emotions and the sentience. If you look at that from a biological point of view, it's actually less interesting than most people think it is.
Go on.
That's the mystery of consciousness and so on. I think you can readily explain it. It's like there's no mystery to it. It's only because people don't know what it is. So it seems mysterious. But to me, it's, again, my interest has been about knowledge and intelligence.
Totally.
And so that's how I look at it.
And
right?
I wouldn't tell you to change. I wouldn't tell you to change, Jeff, at all.
Right. So it's
I like your writing.
Other ideas are not valid. They can be valid. But if I think about, again, like I mentioned earlier, what's unique about humans? Well, other animals have emotions. Don't fool yourself. Dogs are conscious.
Totally. I'm with you.
Right. They feel pain and happiness. But again, this thing that's unique to us is our knowledge and our ability to learn more. That just cries out for like attention. Like that's what we ought to be thinking about. That's what AGI is all about. It's not about building humans. I don't even like the definition of AGI, which is like humans' abilities.
It's not a good reference point.
It's a little bit like I didn't like the Turing test. It's like it's not about emulating humans. It's about understanding the fundamental nature of knowledge and intelligence, and how do we get more of it, and how do we build machines that can do more of it and can help us out, but also exist independent of us. Because there was that, we may not be here forever. So it's like it's not one or the other. It can help us too, but
at some point, exactly. I think again, I'm big on getting people to just swallow the horse pill called eventual. Maybe it's tens of thousands. Maybe it's a million. I think a million years is a goofball number, but let's just fucking throw it out there. A million years. At some point, we're attenuating. We're turning into other stuff. And I think swallowing that is really important, and to consider what that leads to. I think this is the most important question. And you think about it a lot. To your point around sort of, emotions, consciousness being less interesting. I mean, I would say that's definitely an opinion. Now, I would respect your opinion. I would respect your opinion more than mine because you have a lot of grounding in the relative construction of those things. But I would say it's certainly an opinion because I could see someone saying, now, by the way, Jeff, I'm not pushing back against knowledge. I'm trying to learn a thing or two from you here today. So I'm certainly not pushing against knowledge. But what I'm saying is I could see someone saying, hey, if the lights go out and this thing knows how to do calculus that we can't imagine, and it understands something about black holes that we don't grasp, but like in the form of like a hard calculator on a table, that would feel like maybe we're losing something there. Like, would you hope that
what are we losing exactly? I missed that.
Consciousness. Let's assume.
Let's assume my consciousness. By the way, if you build a machine that works on the same principles as humans, that machine can learn. It has memory of what it learned. It has memory of what it was thinking about. I believe consciousness will come for free. That is, consciousness is not something embodied outside of the intelligent processes. So it's not like I would say it's impossible to have a machine that is truly intelligent, that learns on its own, that discovers principles of the world, that isn't conscious.
Okay, so your suspicion is it'll come with the package for you.
It's more than a suspicion. It's got a lot of evidence behind it.
So all right,
can't prove it.
Yeah, I hope you can get to proving it, Jeff, because I really do want to know.
I wrote about it a bit. I gave some thought experiments along these lines to help people come to this conclusion. But look, it's unprovable at this point in time. But
that's
I
fine.
think, some people argue that even if you had a machine that acted like it was conscious, you could say, no, it's not. Like it says, yes, I am. I'm conscious. Trust me. Ask me anything. I'm conscious. And they'll say, nope, it's not. Only humans can have that. Well, that's bullshit. I'm sorry.
I happen to agree. And again, it's very interesting. I get to interview a lot of super brilliant triple PhD folks, and to see the divergence is quite a crazy thing. But I agree with you. I concur on your side that the notion that sort of consciousness exists only within hominids or only within, carbon-based life, I think does feel like a silly supposition. But for you, it comes with the package. Is your perspective? I'm not going to make a direct likeness because I'm sure there's some differences, but I remember in Kurzweil's How to Build a Mind, the basic notion is sort of at some emergent property of sort of complexity and required activity and whatever, it'll be aware.
No, I don't agree with that.
On.
That's giving up. That's like saying, I don't understand it, so it'll just happen. No, we can understand it. I mean, and again, I wrote about this, but I don't want to get into too much.
Yeah. It'll get a little crazy. All right, we'll put it in the show notes.
We can understand this. It's not a property. When people use the word emergent properties, they're saying like, hey, the physics says this, but after you have enough complexity, something else appears that the physics doesn't explain. I don't buy that. It's not like some mysterious emergent property. There's a lot of people who believe in that everything in the world is conscious. A rock is conscious.
Yes. Sure. Panpsychism or whatever.
I think it's crazy. This wild speculation comes about from that no one really has a deep understanding of what consciousness is. And if you have that, then all that craziness goes away. So I think I have a good sense of what's going on, and I've written about it, and I'm just like, nah, it's not crazy. It's interesting, but you can completely explain why we feel conscious. And what's going on in the neurons that make that happen. And it's not an emerging property. It's just a property of the way the system works.
Well, I certainly hope you can make some headway there. I myself have yet to escape Hume's fork, so I'm not even really sure that you exist, but I hope that you do. And I'm conducting this interview as if you do. But so I don't have any certainties in that regard. But in terms of, I have a lot of hope though, or I have my fingers crossed that there will be more headway on when the lights do go on, because I think it sounds as though you would agree, but you just think it's going to happen automatically. If by some wacky chance, whatever populated the galaxy was crazy smart and was constantly acquiring numbers and inventing metaphysics, but it was always lights out. Like this experience of a movie playing in your skull and in my skull was gonzo, like for good, at least from Earth life, totally toast. That would be a shame. For you, it's just like, that's unrealistic. But I think you would concur. You would concur it would be a shame. Or would you say, hey, if it's still knowledge, even if it's not aware of itself, probably it's still doing something good.
I'm not going to give you ground on this. I don't think it's possible.
Okay, got it. All right. There we go. It's a valid perspective. Valid perspective.
You can take a system that has been trained and learned and can do certain things, and you can turn it into a zombie. If it's like a robot that just does stuff, but anything that's acquiring knowledge and exploring the world
has to be conscious.
Learning will have these properties.
Wow.
Not that I think like deep learning networks don't do this, because they don't remember what they were thinking about. They don't even think. They don't even remember what we store memories of not only our immediate past experiences, but what we're thinking about, and we can think about the future and we can think about the past and remember those things. Yeah. So this gives us this sort of window through time where these neurons are recalling thoughts about what we expected and what actually happened. We can go back and forth between these two, and that gives us a sense of presence. We can say, yeah, I was there, and I'm going to be there. And why did I go there? Because I wanted to do this. This gives you this sense of being in the world, that you exist beyond the moment, because you can recall the past and you can recall your thoughts about the future. So it derives from that. It's a bit more complicated than that, but it derives from that.
And look, I'm certainly not here to change your opinions about anything, but it's your perspective is clear. Your position is clear, which is, hey, it's a package deal. There's no version of the world where this thing does anything intelligent and agentic and it's just lights out inside. It's going to be conscious in some way. So totally gather where you're headed. I'll throw one more quick thing on the table, and we'll talk a little bit about how to tell if we're moving in the direction of this this knowledge acquiring, expanding intelligence that for you is sort of the bedrock of what kind of matters. This question would I'm going to tie this to philosophy a little bit. Spinoza has this notion of the conatus and the potentia, which I'm sure there's lengthier academic, treatises on, but I'll try to do the short first. And the conatus is basically this idea that living things, organisms, complex or non-complex, almost by definition have as their primary mandate non-death. Or persistence, which sometimes can involve reproduction, but sort of persistence would be mandate numero uno. So, eating food, reproducing, what have you, not dying.
Right.
And in order to not die, now he wasn't an evolutionary biologist or anything because that stuff wasn't around then, but I'm going to tie it in a little bit. He has this idea of potentia. So potentia are the set of powers and abilities by which something with a conatus tries to not die or tries to persist. So it could be, mating, eating, not perishing. And potentia has bubbled up. I mean, you study the history of intelligence. At some point, nothing could see. There was nothing that had sight, right? And then it's all of a sudden, Jeff, at some point, sight occurred. At some point, there was no locomotion. And I know you're very big on embodiment. And then at some point, there was locomotion and things could actually move. At some point, nothing could fly, nothing could swim. So potentia is bubbled up in the form of a turtle shell. It's bubbled up in the form of language capability, like what you and I have. It's bubbled up in the form of claws and fangs. It's bubbled up in camouflage, being able to blend in with trees and rocks and whatever. So all of those traits, everything I just said, at some point never existed. And here's the idea, that the Spinozan idea is that what life is trying to do is not, maybe it's not like be conscious. Maybe it's aiming to expand its potentia. And I guess a potential argument could be, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, would be that knowledge and intelligence is a part of that mix. It's a part of that mix, as are many myriad physical abilities, as are things that don't yet exist. So if potential was to keep blooming, it wouldn't just be a really good ability to play chess at a vastly posthuman level. It would be entire realms of let's call them cognitive, physical, and other capabilities for which we have no words and no ability to ever put words. And that intelligence is ultimately trying to bubble up not just proxies for we understand, but a set of powers vastly beyond what presently exists.
We have to be careful here because evolution doesn't have a direction. It doesn't want to go in that direction. It can, but it can go backwards too. And so it's not like the goal of life is to have those new capabilities and new things. In reality, the goal of life is based on genes, not individuals. And this is Richard Dawkins' great discovery, one of the biggest discoveries in biology ever, is that genes are the center of evolutionary components. Genes compete, not humans, not our physical bodies, but it's individual genes are what is driving evolution. And they're dumb. They just, it's like
they're dumb.
They work together to come to figure out ways of replicating each other. It's the individual genes that replicate. It's not individual phenotypes of humans or bodies. And so, I think nature can go in that direction, but it doesn't have to. That's not the goal. What I'm trying to, I think we ought to do is realize that there is a trajectory that you can think of knowledge and intelligence as a potentia, if you want to call it that.
Yeah,
but nature's not.
Nature
doesn't. Nature may or may not select that.
Oh, totally. I would concur. I'm just saying maybe we should select for it, which
Right,
I think you agree
I
with.
agree with that, right.
But where I'm going a little beyond is that we should select not just for more of discovering physics and playing chess, but the capability to rip open new magazines of potentia that have hitherto not existed and that we will never have words for.
Right. Well, but what is the goal of those things? The goal in my
the goal would be to not die. The goal would be to continue into the galaxy and not perish. Because I think if your knowledge machine went into the sky and did chess and then died, you'd be very sad about that knowledge machine.
Right. But again, be careful here because what is the goal? The goal, we all die, right? We all die, and species die.
But you've had your kids, they pass on. You'll have your machines, they'll pass something on, right?
Right. So I'm trying to say, you should set your goal. I'm not telling other people to do it. This is how I view the world.
Totally.
Our best goal is the acquisition and preservation of knowledge. And there may be multiple ways of doing that. One way, it doesn't require a species or even a particular type of entity to exist forever. It just means that we have ability to pass it on, just like we pass on knowledge to our children.
Totally.
We can pass on knowledge to other species. We can pass on knowledge to other intelligent machines. Intelligent machines can pass on knowledge to other intelligent machines. And so just be careful that living forever is this thing a lot of people want to do, and maybe they think machines ought to do that too. That may be true, but it may not be. It doesn't, in my mind, that's not the end goal.
Well, I would say I'm happy if such a potential snowball is constantly perishing and rebuilding itself in the same way. You passed on knowledge to your children, Jeff. You know what else you passed on? Eye color, physical dexterity of your hands, some degree of IQ. You passed a bunch of stuff on outside of the English language and whatever you taught them, right? Like you passed a bunch of stuff on.
I wasn't unique in that. They would have
Sure. I get it. But what I'm getting at is like if the thing kept perishing, but it was passing those things on, I would consider that to be worthy. I think probably you would concur. Like, I'm not married to an entity that never dies. I'm definitely not married to that. I'm married to, at least presently, as a human, I can only imagine so much, the torch staying lit. That is to say, the torch of life. And I would consider knowledge to be a part of that wide set of things that could permit a thing to keep going out and to...
So I would agree with all that, except I would say it's not important that the torch stays lit. It's important that a torch stays lit. So one torch can go out and another torch can be lit, and maybe 1,000 torches can be lit. All the original ones go away.
I say because it kind of started with whatever the hell bubbled up here. But yeah, to your point, I'm okay with. I'm not speciesist. There we go. All right, nice. Good. Yeah, something's burning somewhere, and hopefully maybe a brilliant blaze of experience and knowledge and ability that could continue and do things that we can't do. So it seems like we're on the same page, at least in some regard there. I guess moving into the direction of building these things. Of course, this has been your life's work for quite some time now, Jeff. And your intellectual contributions with your books and whatever as well. When we think about moving closer to something for you, which would automatically be conscious if it was smart, but would be able to continue to acquire knowledge, and even if it didn't continue, pass that on through other permutations of this intelligence that could grow in this knowledge capability over time, which maybe we'd call a branch of potential, whatever we want to use as the phraseology here. How, when we're boots on the ground, let's say OpenAI has a breakthrough, or you have a breakthrough, or someone else has a breakthrough, and it's like, wow, this biped robots are incredibly capable now. That's incredible. How would you look under the hood and say, are we getting closer to the kind of thing that we'd really be proud of? A million years from now, if we happen to be gone, are we getting closer to the kind of AI that is the right kind? What are your thoughts there?
So let me answer that in two ways, if you don't mind.
Please.
One is, we're trying to build that future right now. In fact, we think we know enough about how the neocortex works and the brain works. We've proven that internally, our research, we've proven we can build systems that work on these principles. And just a couple months ago, we announced the formation of an open source project called the 1,000 Brains Project.
Cool.
Which we got funding from the Gates Foundation to do this and other people. We open sourcing all of our research. We have different hardware companies, different actually government agencies around the world have joined with us. My book has created a lot of interest in this. And so we're creating this a real serious project to build this stuff in a very open way. So we're not just sitting back and hoping it happens. We're going to be as active as we can to make it happen. The second thing is, how would you tell? I made analogies to this in the past. It's like, how do you tell if something a computer or not? You can't really judge it by the behavior of the thing. You can't say, like I use a very simple example. I could have a toaster which has a computer in it that does all these functions, or I could build a dedicated machine that does those same functions that doesn't have a computer in it. And from the outside, you can't really tell. Yeah. If I saw a car going down the street, I can't tell if that car is intelligent or there's a human driving.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like how we define computers. You say, well, is it a computer or not? There's a set of things it has. It has a memory and ability to transfer information, and it has a computational unit and has instructions. And if a system has that, we call it a computer. Whether it's made of, Tinker Toys or silicon, doesn't really matter. Same things I believe should happen with intelligent machines. There's a set of principles, which I've outlined, which I think define what it required to be intelligent. And you can look inside a system and say, is it doing that? Is it learning through movement? Is it learning continuously? it doesn't, we don't train on a million data sets. We train by selectively sampling the world.
Yeah.
And what do the internal models look like? I gave a talk at Stanford recently about this very topic, about the internal models. How is knowledge represented inside the system? And in brains, it's used a type of thing called the reference frame. And transformers, it's a different type of system. So you can say, okay, these, and maybe, I've offered a set of principles. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people want to offer a different set. But you can define a set of things that says, is this thing really working on the right principles or not? And if it is, we're going in the right direction. If it's not the wrong direction. It's just not the direction of AGI or intelligence. And this is why one of the reasons I say that I don't think transformer networks, the large language models and so on we see today, are on the path to intelligence, because they're not working under the right principles. They're really powerful and they're really cool, but they're just not going to get there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's a way you can tell whether it's like we have to come to an agreement about what is intelligence and what are the principles by which it requires. And it can't focus on the behavior. This is the big mistake I mentioned earlier. If we focus on the behavior, when the computers first started doing math, the same thing happened. People, oh my God, these things are super intelligent because look, this math is hard and they're doing it. Well, now we just don't think it's hard at all. It's like, yeah, a calculator does that. That's not a problem at all. It's like, that's not really intelligent. I think one of the things these large language models have showed us is that language modeling isn't as difficult as we thought it was. Maybe humans aren't very good at it. Our brains weren't evolved for this.
Yeah.
And it turns out if you just want to model language, well, guess what? There are better ways of doing it. Those models don't really understand anything else, but they do understand language very well. And they do a really good job at it. So I think we have to be careful not to get fooled by the output of the system. And we have to, I think the world will move in this direction. I know it's not there today, but the world will move into the direction of computers. Like, well, is this a computer or not? Here's the principles it has to work by. Is this an intelligent system or not? Here's the principles by it has to work by.
Yeah. Okay. Really interesting. There's a lot to unpack here, Jeff, if we could. So, one thing that you brought up, is this idea that, okay, if it abides by these principles, then, hey, we can say this is an intelligent thing, or this is maybe at some point we could even say a conscious thing, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a world where, let's just say, hypothetically, I don't have a dog in the fight, so I know you kind of do, but if I'm just looking as an outside fella, we've got our Numenta research folks, we got our DeepMind research folks, we got our OpenAI research folks, whoever puts the thing in a bajillion, physical instantiations. Again, we got some beetle robots, we got some industrial robots, we got some life sciences robots, we got a lot of biped robots. Maybe we got cats in people's freaking houses that are, running around and getting pet or so, whatever, but it's getting tactile. And like you said, it doesn't have to be senses that humans have. This thing could be looking at infrared. It could be detecting chemicals with the ends of its fingers or its, phalanges or whatever. Who the heck knows? But it could have a bajillion of these instantiations and be acting intelligently, therefore. Would any of those, so long as they're checking that box, basically be for you what would eventually, assuming long into the future we attenuate, would any of those things be a worthy successor? Or would you see there being a way where maybe there is a version of something that could be intelligent, built in the wrong way or on the wrong principles or whatever, where like it can do stuff, but when we're gone, like it's not able to carry on in any meaningful way and keep that knowledge generation going in any appreciable way? Is there a way to build something that's a great tool but won't be such a successor that could outlast us?
I think it's hard to make the successor. And when humans are gone, imagine I can build these really super intelligent machines. I don't even want to say machine because I don't know what their substrate is, but let's call it a machine.
Yep. We'll say machine for now.
Right. The challenge is that anything we create won't last. It'll decay. And so you end up forcing yourself saying, well, do I have to give these things the ability to procreate or recreate or copy themselves? I gave the example once where you send a bunch of super intelligent machines to the next star and they're exploring and they're having a great time, but now they're wearing out. How do they repair themselves? There's no factories there. You can't go, give me another chip,
Yeah, they'd have to generate nanobots that could patch things or whatever it is.
So the hard part actually is replication and independent of humans. and the ability to basically, you just can't design anything to last forever. So you have to have the ability to replicate, just like biology does. And that's outside of intelligence. That's just saying the reality is, if I want to create intelligent machines that last forever, they're not going to last forever. So we have to have the ability for them to recreate themselves somehow. And I have no idea how to go about doing that yet. It's, that's a challenge, that we can use intelligent machines here and now for humans, and we can use them to explore our solar system, and it could be great. But if we want something to transcend humanity, something to survive after we're gone, that is a challenge, because we are not around, they're no longer our tools. They have to be their own sort of entities that can survive indefinitely.
Absolutely.
And how do you do that? I don't know how to do that.
Okay, so for you, that might even be harder than intelligence. Would be the.
It is. Well, I don't know. It's just, I don't know if it's harder, but it's not something I'm thinking about. It's
okay. It's not your problem exactly.
I don't think it's the first thing to worry about. I mean, the first thing to worry about is not how to create things that replicate beyond humanity. That's the first thing to worry about. Is just understand what intelligence is. Build intelligent machines. Those intelligent machines may help us figure out how to solve those other problems. I mean, day one, figure out what intelligence is. Day two, build machines that are really smart. Then figure out how to use them to advance the world we want to see. I focus on just, what is intelligence? What are the principles? How do we build them? Let's get that process started.
To be clear, you're being you're putting a point out here of, hey, for it eventually, if it were to go off and do worthy and great things beyond us at some long distant future, it would have to be capable of some degree of replication or I don't know, infinite repair or whatever, some way of
like that, right,
a combination of preservation, replication, creation. And you're saying, so that would be a worthy successor quality we would want. But I've heard you say obviously elsewhere that just rampant replication could be a danger even when humans are here on the planet.
Right. Well, we don't create a virus that can kill all the humans, right?
Totally.
So that's a balance that's tricky. I think we're really far from that. I think, as I said, the order is first building intelligent machines, understanding intelligence. We're not there yet. We're getting close. And once we get to that point, once we get to the point of saying, maybe even facing our own demise, which we're already facing it now.
For sure. I'm
potential. I'm not saying certain. Potential. That we'll have to think about that as well. I did write about, ways of trying to preserve knowledge, even if there's no intelligent machines. Like you could try to preserve knowledge for future intelligent animals on Earth, or future intelligent system things from elsewhere in the universe coming to visit us. But that's not really the end goal. That's like a time capsule. Like, hey, here's who we were. Here's what we knew. Someone else might discover that. Really, the goal would be to create intelligent machines that could explore the universe and could repair infinitely or replicate really, because you'd want to spread it out throughout the universe, hopefully. And the moment we don't have any evidence that any other intelligent systems have achieved that. We're not, some people have argued that maybe it's happening, we're just not aware of it, but we don't know that yet. And we don't know how to do it ourselves. So let's start with the thing I think we can do today, which is build intelligent machines.
Got it. So long enough term in the future, it sounds like I just want to make sure I've got this in a nutshell, and we'll move to our final question. For you, it would eventually need to either, repair, replicate, create into the future. That would be a necessity for such a thing that could be a successor if at some point we're gone. And similarly, my guess is you wouldn't want such an entity. Let's say it's streaming through the galaxy at near light speed because it's discovered all these things, to just be executing on some human level goal that was programmed in it, 2,000 years ago. My guess is you would like this knowledge rolling entity to be able to conceive of its own aims. Maybe
perhaps, it's perhaps, I don't know if we have a choice in the matter or not.
I don't either, honestly.
I think the goal of acquiring knowledge, the best as I can guess today, is a universal one that will transcend time. It's hard to imagine how at some point in time some future entity wouldn't want to acquire knowledge. It's just hard to imagine. Maybe it won't, but if I had to pick something, that's the thing I'd pick. I think what you wouldn't want to do is transgress and decide, hey, the only thing I care about is, making copies of myself. So I'll just, destroy everything else to do that. That wouldn't be a worthy goal.
So you would want it to be locked into the acquisition of a giant moving library of knowledge so that other intelligent entities it could interact with. Like, is the purpose of preservation so that when it meets some other foreign alien or some other interdimensional entity, it would be able to say, hey, I know I have Jeff's whole book in my backpack over here, and I've also discovered all these cool physics things. Like, is the purpose for that passing on to some other intelligence?
Right.
Or what is the purpose for you?
Right. The purpose. Well, remember, we started this conversation saying there is no obvious purpose to our existence.
Yep, I'm with you on that.
And so I don't want to just blithely go through life saying, well, too bad, let's say la vie, we'll just come and go. Let's pretend that we don't really care about the universe. And so I have to pick something I can personally say, like, well, that seems like a worthy goal. It may be right, it may be wrong, but I have no other alternate.
Yep. You got to pick one. Yeah. And so
I don't have anything else to go by. I don't think it's rampant replication. To me, that's
totally. I would concur. That's an unworthy successor, right?
That's what we've got today on this planet.
Okay.
It leaves all kinds of problems. So
yeah.
Right. Again, I don't want to say I know the answer to these questions. I just don't have any other answers.
I really appreciate your frankness on that, because some people would say, I do know the eternal answer, but I like yours. I mean, I tend to bend very much in the direction of, geez, I can only imagine so much. I hope it can imagine more than me. But like, to your point, you're saying, look, this is the one I got. This is the one I'm hoping for. This is as much as I can think of. This is my contribution here. I'm swinging at this one. And I think that's very fair, because you could say, no, there's only one eternally right answer, and I've actually discovered it, right?
By the way,
I like this opinion.
If someone else had a different opinion, I'd really like to hear it. I mean, there are a lot of people who do think, the propagation of our genes is really the thing we care about.
Yeah.
And I don't, all right, fine, but let's go to the next solar system or the next, next star. We're not going to get there, okay?
I concur. I think just the replication of genes is not the eternal aim. I'd have a nuanced perspective on kind of where I stand. I think it in many regards has commonalities with yours, maybe some differences. I'll email it or something. We don't have the time for today.
I like it.
But
Can you give me the 2-sentence one?
I mean, the 2-sentence version, and I'll zip it along. It's the original Worthy Successor essay. If you Google the term like AGI Worthy Successor, it's just the one up there. But I think that the core idea from my side is that I think the acquisition of knowledge is incredibly important. I see knowledge as a branch, a wing, a portion of the total state space of possible powers that would permit a thing to keep to survive again, even if that means it's dying and then other things are created. It doesn't mean one thing, but it's keeping the flame burning. I would see knowledge as a very important part of that. I would be excited to see goals beyond ours be reached. And I don't think beyond ours means dumb replication. I would guess, Jeff, goals beyond ours might be as worthy and grand and noble as your ideas are compared to your ideas of, that your house cat has, right? Your house cat's notion of the big picture is a pretty shit idea. I think yours is a much better one. And my supposition is there are higher goods for which we cannot currently conceive. And I think the best we can do, to your point, and I very much agree with you here, is let's set a trajectory with what we at least think would be the right jump start and would be frickin' valuable. And my subtle caveat here is, I think there's a big state space of potential of those things that we would want to grow. And golly,
that's great.
Yeah. And I think you'd concur with some of that stuff. So
I do. I concur. But again, what can I do today to get to that understanding that future state space?
Yeah, well,
I can build machines that are super smart, machines that can explore the world that we can't explore, machines that can send to Mars, machines that can do scientific experiments we can't do. That's the thing we can do today in this century that seems worthy, and we'll have to leave it to the next generation to figure out what are those future state space.
Absolutely. Well, the baton is going to keep going. Hopefully, like you said, nature doesn't always hand it up, but hopefully we can jumpstart it to go up. And in that regard, I totally concur with where you're headed. With that said, I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for me to learn from you. Speaking of my acquisition of knowledge, around what your it could be recommendations or hopes for what the innovators and the regulators do to get us to a place where we have something that could carry on some kind of a worthy project beyond us into a deeper future, and also maybe hopefully make our lives a lot better too. You probably are looking out at some of the policy perspectives. Luckily you're not on Twitter, Jeff. It's a very good choice. It's a very messy, terse conversation out there. But, you look out at academic papers, you look at, the EU passing laws and other things. There's probably some things you like and don't like. Could be innovators, could be regulators. What do you hope leaders of the world sort of bear in mind as policies being steered and innovation dollars are being funneled towards different kinds of innovation? What do you hope for in that mix that you think would bring us closer to a better future for humans and post-human life?
Yeah, right. Well, remember, almost everything that's being done today in this area is based on today's AI technology.
Yeah.
And so, I'm a potential consumer of that technology. I'm a potential someone who's impacted by it. I don't think, as I've said many times, that that's the path to, AGI. And so anytime people start worrying about, the, intelligence explosion or the, runaway or misaligned, I just don't believe that's actually going to happen with today's technology. So to me, it's very much more pedantic or everyday things like, I don't want my data stolen. I don't want, I hate, we should be doing absolutely everything to prevent, fake stuff being produced because it's going to wreak havoc. So I think, in some sense, I think regulators are slow, but they're latching on to the right things, privacy and authenticity. But I don't think they're working on the problem that you're talking about. Is like, what can we do from a policy point of view to ensure the really future of intelligent machines?
Yeah.
I just think, honestly, I'll be quite honest. The way I view the world, the kind of research we're doing, the 1,000 Brains Project. These are all a very small subset of what most people think about AI. I happen to think it's the center of it. It will be the center of it. It will be the actual germ that turns into true AGI stuff. But that's a very minority opinion. There are other people who believe that too, but it's a minority opinion. So I'm not too worried about, I'm more worried about a human and as a person about the abuses of today's AI, but less about that AI's problems related to the future of intelligent machines and the successor to humanity. Yeah. I don't think that stuff's going to get there. I mean, I know Sam Altman would disagree with me.
Well, and I think, to be frank, I think there's probably many people within OpenAI who look very frankly at what's going on and say, hey, there's going to need to be more fundamental breakthroughs here. Right. And so I would suspect even within these big LLM camps, people are assuming OpenAI until the end of time is just going to do what they're doing now. My guess is that might not be the case. My guess is they may be spending more than, the GDP of some smaller countries on, whatever the next paradigm is. So it sounds like one firm supposition, of course you have, and this is one I would have known, is, hey, I hope significant research dollars go to LLM alternative pathways to intelligence. And of course, having a dog in the fight, you would say, hey, maybe we should look more at something that's brain inspired or brain correlative. Right. If I'm picking up what you're putting down. So that's, that's clear.
It's true. Although, I've long ago, I came to the conclusion that the approach I was advocating, this goes back in the 1980s, was not viewed positively by a lot of AI researchers. I was told, brains don't matter, why are you studying brains? It's useless. It's not going to help us understand intelligent systems. I've been told that so many times. Trust me, really smart people have that position. And so I always felt like, and this is true in my other work too, in mobile computing, I always felt like, you know what? I don't want to convince other people. I'm tired of convincing other people. I don't want to try to do that. I'd rather just do it.
Yeah.
I just make it happen. And don't be sitting around, begging people to do things for me. Just if I'm right, I should be able to do it myself. I should be able to make this happen. I should, and that's what we're doing. The 1,000 Brains Project is, we're not waiting around for anybody. We're doing it. And we're building this stuff, and we're building a coalition of researchers around the world. We're going to do it. And totally. I don't need outside funding for this. It'd be nice. We are getting outside funding.
Of course.
But we didn't ask for it. It wasn't like, we need it. Yeah. It's like people said, hey, that's cool what you're doing. Here's some money.
Yeah.
So, it's just the nature of me. I'm not a very competitive person in the sense of I want to argue with people. I don't want to get in discussions with philosophers. I would lose that. Their language is just crazy complicated for me.
Yeah.
And so, I have a vision of the future. I want to make it happen. If I'm right, time is on my side. I don't need to. If my vision is right, it's not going to be wrong because someone else thought it was wrong. It's either right or it's wrong. And if I'm right, it'll happen. And all I can do is try to make it happen sooner.
Absolutely.
So I don't need to get in arguments with people.
Well, and I'm not asking you to do so either. I'm simply saying, hey, what are your hopes for the innovator ecosystem? What are your hopes for the regulator ecosystem? It sounds like, and I'm going to. Yeah, go ahead.
Those two separate things. Regulation of today's AI, good idea. There's some real problems there.
Oh, really? This is a good point. So the funding and the research for kind of the brain correlative stuff and LLM alternatives very clear from you in terms of what you hope innovators do. And maybe that's both hardware, software, all that stuff. But yeah, on the regulatory side, I'm curious, I know you're not a big AGI risk person, but you did just mention there that maybe there's some reason to regulate what's going on now. What are your hopes, assuming we want to get to that successor? What do you hope for regulation?
I'm only interested in regulating today's large language models, today's stuff, because it's dangerous, and I also think it's dangerous, and it's also violating people's property rights, and
there is some of that for sure.
Right, I think
that's for sure.
I think we haven't seen the full downside of this yet, but I think it's coming. The whole idea of the fake images and fake personalities and fake videos is very damaging. And that is something that should be regulated, or at least I say regulated. It should be very clear. We could have laws that say, like, look, if you generate a fake image and you don't label it as a fake image, that's a crime. That shouldn't be, acceptable. If you put out a video of Kamala Harris saying something that she never said, and you don't say this is a fake one, it's like that should be up there with libel.
There's some of that stuff coming. In all fairness, is it possible that non-LLM systems could also generate personalities that aren't humans? Is this explicit to LLMs?
But that's what we've got today. So it's not that it's LLM. It's like whatever people are producing things today. There are anti-libel laws.
Totally.
So it's a sort of an extension of that.
So for you, there's privacy, libel, those things, those practical law-breaking things with today's tech, you would say, hey, we should focus on that. But you don't want to see a focus on, hey, there should be global coordination on some level around artificial general intelligence.
I just don't see the risk there today. I'm, as you said, I'm not a believer that the current technology is going to blossom into super intelligence. I don't believe that any of the risks that people have written about of these existential risks. I think all of them could, if you really understand what intelligence systems are and how they work, you see that's not going to happen. Those people who propose those things basically do so because they don't really understand what intelligence is. They don't understand what consciousness is. They're working in a vacuum that's like, hey, this stuff could happen, and humans are like this. Maybe it's going to happen. Where I'm thinking, like, I'm going to build them a system that works. I have a system. I know how that system's going to work. It's not like kind of have emerging properties that, like, whoa, all of a sudden the physics is different. It's like, it doesn't happen like that.
Well, I think it does seem. I have a reasonable amount of respect for Bengio, and of the people that maybe understand intelligence. Maybe his neuroscience is weak, but I think his computer science is probably pretty beefy. And I would say, not that I necessarily agree with all of his undergirding theories as well, but I wouldn't necessarily presume all things smarter than us. Hey, if we just know how it works, necessarily we'll have a happy-go-friendly place in an ecosystem with it. Now, I'm not rooting against you.
I didn't say that. I'm just saying, knowing how it works tells me that the current technology is much less of a threat than people think it is.
But we're going to bloom the big posthuman stuff, maybe even from your lab, right? Hypothetically.
Right. But we're too early to regulate that.
So your thought is, but do you think there is a threshold after which you would say, you know what? We got robots that are like more human than human. Like, I think, maybe, is there a day? Right, maybe. Okay.
Maybe. I just, until we have more data, I think Bengio said this too, until you have data, it's like,
true. He has said that.
Right. You just have to. We're not there yet on the work we're doing. We're not there yet. I wouldn't know what to regulate. I don't even know what the problems are.
I'm with you. It's a valid point.
Let's build something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So
we'll deal with that problem
when it comes, I guess. Yeah. And as a non-competitive guy, I think there is something humorous here about like, all right, well, those guys in that race, regulate them, but hey, my stuff don't. But I get what you mean. I'm not actually picking on you. You're bringing up a good point.
Technology actually, they're being deployed in the world now in large
totally,
scale.
and
so
in ways that are no, I would totally agree.
It has nothing to do with
you.
the technology itself. It just has to do with the impact on society.
Totally,
that is real. The work we're doing right now hasn't impacted society yet.
Yep.
So when we get to that point, it's a good time to ask.
Hopefully you will get there, sir. I'm certainly rooting for you, Jeff. And I know we had a heck of a lot of questions to go through. Fortunately, we got to dig through almost everything. So I very much appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, Dan, it's a pleasure. I enjoyed speaking to you. And these are fun topics to talk about. And what a pleasure.
It's been a blast.
Do that with you.
So that's all for this episode of The Trajectory. This is our 5th episode in the Worthy Successor series. A big thank you to Jeff for being able to join us. Again, sorry the video didn't work out, but hopefully his ideas made it more than worth your stay. I appreciate that you're here all the way to the end. As with all the other episodes, in the show notes is a link to the Worthy Successor criteria of Jeff Hawkins, as well as the governance recommendations for Jeff to make sure that whatever AI we create turns into a worthy successor. I really like Jeff's ideas around kind of the inevitable posthuman transition given a long enough time horizon. Obviously, he still has plenty of respect for humanity, but he's just thinking in a long enough term. I think that his rationale for that is absolutely well-reasoned. I disagreed somewhat playfully with his notion of knowledge being sort of the grand purpose of artificial general intelligence, the acquisition, the collection of knowledge. In my opinion, knowledge is sort of a subset of something that allows an entity to be more powerful and act more powerfully in the world. But there are many other kinds of capabilities outside of knowledge, and there are probably mental, conscious, or otherwise unknown capabilities beyond knowledge that we don't currently know. So I wouldn't concur entirely with that particular idea, but I'd love to know your thoughts. Make sure to comment down below in YouTube. Give me a sense of sort of what you liked about Jeff's ideas, agreed, disagreed. We've had some very interesting comments on Richard Sutton's episode when it came out and Nick Bostrom's episode when it came out. Would love to see what you guys think about Jeff's episode as well. Our last guest will be the only one in this series with a German accent. And if you're familiar with AGI thinkers over the last decade, there should be one that comes to mind, but you're going to have to stick around and see who that is. But without further ado, we'll wrap up from here. I'll catch you in the next episode and our final episode in the Worthy Successor series here on The Trajectory.